The narrative of the first Intifada 36 years ago today is not easily forgotten. But despite its importance, it is also a story that can seem to be gathering dust on the museum shelf, its power diminished by nostalgia and lament until the Al-Aqsa flood awoke the global dormant giant of pro-Palestine. For Palestinian youth today, the first Intifada means more than an echoed chronicle heard through their parents' generation. It is a testament that if Palestinians allow elitist representatives and flawed leadership to speak on their behalf, their struggle will be misconstrued and hijacked. Just as happened in 1993 when the signing of the Oslo Accords and its results, which not only killed any sense of confrontation, but also further buried Palestine with a neoliberal capitalism that made the daily survival of Palestinians living under occupation completely dependent on Zionist Israel. The first Palestinian Intifada, which was ignited on December 8, 1987 in Jabalia and the Gaza Strip, then spread to all the cities, villages and camps of Palestine after an Israeli entity truck driver ran over a group of Palestinian workers at a checkpoint that had separated the Gaza Strip from the rest of the Palestinian territory since 1948. As a result, the volcano of popular anger erupted from the Jabalia camp, where the families of the innocent victims lived, to include the entire Gaza Strip, and its repercussions reverberated violently in the face of the occupation in the occupied West Bank. Even Gaza's students and children had a large share of the resistance and heroism at the time, and they gave the watching world, as usual, lessons in defending land and rights. Today, all of Gaza, every inch of Gaza, every stone in Gaza, every living and martyred human, animal and tree in Gaza is a live testimony of the Zionist Israeli barbarism, terrorism, and savagery. Yet, it also is a witness to the most steadfast, resilient, and determined resistance against an occupation on this planet. This mix spelled the recipe for a global intifada of conscience, never seen before in human history. What is both surprising and optimistic today is the extent of the ideological diversity and geographical breadth of those who participated in the Intifada of global conscience for Palestine. Millions across the world hit the streets, filling public squares, putting their routine life of their respective cities on hold, expressing their rejection of the genocide carried out by the Zionist occupation against the Palestinians in Gaza. The truth is that since the anti-war demonstrations that spread around the world in the 1970s, we have never witnessed such a joint global stand and such a common rebellion spread throughout the world. This, ladies and gentlemen, is called an intifada of conscience. Welcome to the Madi Stream. I'm Marwa Osman. Just as we are witnessing an internal Palestinian uprising for liberation, the whole world is going through a state of uprising of conscience from the Pacific Ocean to the English Channel. To understand the nature of this new change in the world, it is useful to go back to history, specifically 36 years ago. Even in the first Intifada that began in Palestine in the Jabalia refugee camp of Gaza in the 1980s, the world had never witnessed such a strong protest against the Israeli entity's brutality. To discuss this issue with us from the occupied West Bank is Dr. Amal Wahdan, human rights advocate. It's always a pleasure to have you with us, especially in these very important times, Dr. Amal. Now, while the first Intifada was hailed for its grassroots efforts and communal work, it is also associated with the failure of leaders to take it and nurture it into the powerful movement that it had the potential to be. Yet this failure bred a new Palestinian youth whom we are witnessing perform resistance we have never seen before, despite the horrors of the Israeli entity aggression against the people of Gaza and the genocide against them. Is that a success in your eyes, the eyes of a Palestinian living under occupation and that has witnessed both eras?
Thanks for having me, Marwa. And yes, we can say that proudly, actually. The first Intifada, with its unified leadership of the Intifada, had actually advanced the achievements of the first Intifada. And it gained global momentum and support. We can't compare it to what's happening now on the international scale, as between 1987 and today, lots has changed, and the Palestinian cause continued to gain momentum, global momentum, regardless of the setback of the Oslo Accords. The first Intifada, of course, the leadership had hijacked all the achievements that was brought in with the sacrifice of the martyrs and the sacrifice of those who were jailed and those who were deported from the homeland. The whole leadership of the Intifada was deported or jailed. So yes, we can say that between 1987 and today, we went through several phases of uprisings and had pushed the resistance to be as sophisticated as we can see it today, and to gain as well the support of the people, all Palestinian people within Palestine and around the countries, the surrounding Arab countries. We had we're witnessing some negativities as we see more and more of the Arab regimes support.
Definitely. I want to talk to you about that, because we did see, especially last week, horrendous support for the Zionist entity from Arabs themselves. But the Palestinian Intifada, which was ignited in December 8, 1987, brought about years later the Oslo Accord, which basically crushed away any form of armed resistance in the West Bank and further suffocated the Gaza Strip, leading to the explosion that we saw or that we are living through. Do you fear that this current flood Intifada, which turned into a liberation process, might end up the same way that the first Intifada ended?
Well, as I said, the first Intifada was hijacked by its own Palestinian movement and leadership. Mm-hmm. We hope and we pray that this current uprising flood won't have the same end, because we can see that the enemy, led by the USA, is trying to suppress the resistance movement in Gaza, suppress its achievements on the ground, and of course dividing the Palestinian into two. One that is led by the Oslo Accord, which, by the way, was a huge setback for the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian national movement. They're trying to give some live support for the Oslo Accords and for the two-state solution, which is refused by the majority of our people.
What we are certainly witnessing today, Dr. Wahdan, is an intifada of global conscience towards Palestine and the Palestinian cause. Was the extent of the ideological diversity and the geographical breadth of those participating in support of Palestine a surprise to you?
Well, actually, to an extent, yes, but again, as I said, the Palestinian cause has gained momentum, even though we were living the Oslo Accords negativities and setback, but it gave us a momentum on the global arena. And we continue to have this accumulation through the different phases of the uprising, as I said, and through the support of the international support. What we are witnessing today on the ground in occupied Palestine, all of occupied Palestine, the colonial apartheid regime is facing an existential threat. Within its own camp, there is a huge differences, a huge opposition, and the economy is going back. the military establishment, the security establishment is fragmented, and they cannot face the resistance on the ground in Gaza while they're doing their ground incursions. On the other side, we can see that the momentum that we are gaining globally are a setback. It's a setback for this colonial apartheid state. Definitely. So if you see the whole theater, the global theater, we are gaining, and the Israelis are losing momentum.
Well, in hopes, hopefully, inshallah, that this new form of liberation process sees fruit and bears fruit with least amount of casualties, because the numbers are really horrifying coming from Gaza. But I want to thank you very much from the occupied West Bank, Dr. Amal Wahdan, human rights advocate, for talking to us about this and remembering with us the first Intifada and what new outcomes we are waiting for from this new round of Al-Aqsa flood. Thanks a million for being with us so early in the morning, Dr. Amal. Now, ladies and gents, please stay tuned, because next we are going to talk about how this new intifada of conscience is taking over the world for Palestine. In justifying its brutal aggression against the Gaza Strip after Operation Al-Aqsa flood, the Israeli occupation began to place itself in the context of the Western narrative about the global war on terrorism led by the United States of America, which the Zionist Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu summarized as the war of civilization against barbarism, considering what Zionist Israel is doing as self-defense. More details in the following report. It is not strange for Zionist Israel to place itself in the context of the Western narrative of allegedly fighting terrorism, as it always claims that it is the only democratic state in the region in an environment of tyranny, and that it is the first, if not only, bastion in defending civilization in a savage environment. The Israeli entity claims ignore the reality of the conflict, the real narrative of which says that Zionist Israel is an executioner and the Palestinians are victims. It inverts this narrative and claims that it is the target of Palestinian terrorism, as if there is no major crime committed against the Palestinians in the crime of genocide and forced displacement, which uprooted an entire people from their homeland and prevented them from returning home. As if Zionist Israel did not wage aggressive wars on the countries of the region, did not wage wars on the Gaza Strip, did not plant dozens of settlements and hundreds of thousands of Israeli entity colonial settlers in the occupied Palestinian territories, did not kill Palestinians daily, and that the Palestinians do not have national and individual rights that Zionist Israel denies them. All of this does not exist. Palestinians kill Israeli entity soldiers and settlers not because they have stolen rights, but because they are savages who hate the civilization that Zionist Israel represents. This is the Zionist Israeli narrative. This is not new to Zionist Israel. What is new in this war is the West's complete adoption of the Israeli regime discourse as an extension of the Western discourse and located at its center, considering Zionist Israel as part of this discourse and repeating what the Israeli entity says about this war as self-defense. Within the framework of full support for Zionist Israel, Western pilgrims flocked to show support, starting with the US President Joe Biden, passing through German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, French President Emmanuel Macron, all the way to the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and others who flocked to the occupied Palestinian land to express their support for the alleged Zionist war against terrorism. Support for Zionist Israel was not limited to verbal positions and military and financial support. Rather, it went beyond that in European countries to criminalize solidarity with Palestinian civilians who are bombed by Israeli entity missiles, and ban Palestinian national symbols as terrorists, meaning the Palestinian flag and the kufiyyeh. Western countries have always been biased towards the Israeli regime in the conflict in the region, But this bias has never reached the point of silencing people as it does today, against the backdrop of the genocidal war on Gaza. In exchange for this European alignment with Zionist Israel, there was another battle in these countries, not only for the war on the Gaza Strip, but also for the sake of preventing the European ruling elites from cutting off the tongues of refugees and citizens of non-European origins who felt themselves targeted in this war in a way. Hence why the demonstrations against the war in Gaza in the streets of European countries came from an overwhelming majority of citizens of non-European origins. And this was an indication of polarization between the issues of the global north and the global south, even within the European countries themselves. Gaza brought to this intersection not only the plight of Palestinians, but also issues of injustice suffered by citizens of non-European origins across the entirety of the European continent. Now, joining us to talk about this issue is our guest from Beirut, Dr. Omar Nashabi, political analyst and lawyer expert in human rights and supervisor of the Al-Qaws supplement, which is published weekly with the Lebanese daily newspaper Al-Akhbar. Thanks a million for being with us this morning. Dr. Omar, now at a time when the Western regimes deemed that Palestinians must die under Israeli entity shelling without protest from them or those who stand in solidarity with them, especially in Europe, like the refugees or refugees from origins that are not European. They were found flocking the streets of Europe. They not only to stand in solidarity with the Palestinians as well, but to stand in solidarity with themselves, who are being basically censored by these European far-right governments, seeking to silence them at every corner. What does this polarization between the public and the government mean to you?
Well, it puts into question the whole idea that there is a democratic world where, these governments in the West actually represent the people. And the people just realized, I think a large number of the people in in Western countries, especially European and the United States and Canada, just realized that their governments are only based on, securing the interests of large corporations, and they're not, they don't stand for any principle of the principles that are in the educational system, in the democratic system. And they realized also, the people realized that their governments use double standards, where human rights is not for all humans everywhere in the world. It's for people who actually serve the interests of these large corporations. It's for white people. It's for people who are pro-Western countries and who serve the Western countries' interests. And these double standards are now clearer than ever. And also there's this racist and colonial legacy that is now clearer than ever with this incredible support of Western countries, support not just for Israel, but against the ceasefire. So the people are calling for a ceasefire. I mean, how can you reject a call for ceasefire when so many children are being killed, so many hospitals are being bombed? That's completely insane. And I think the large masses in Western countries are realizing this more and more every day.
Well, Dr. Nashabi, remembering with you the first Intifada, as I was speaking to my first guest about the 1987 Intifada, which broke out in Gaza and then spread to the rest of the historic Palestinian map and then to the world, how can we learn from that experience to at least lever the current wave of global Intifada in support of Palestine?
Well, the first Intifada in '87 was a very powerful movement that reminded the world that the Palestinian issue that has been going on, the Palestinian question that has been going on since the 30s, is an issue that needs to be resolved in a just way and in a fair way. And, I think what we should learn, what we can learn from the first Intifada is that the unity of the Palestinian people is paramount. The Palestinians have to be together, have to stand together. Today the West Bank is in full solidarity with Gaza, yet, and the West Bank has been subject to so many, oppressive, arrests, and, the Israeli intelligence and army arrested around more than 3,000 Palestinians from the West Bank in order to deprive them, to stop them from starting a new Intifada, because that what they know, the Israelis know that a new Intifada in the West Bank is going to be a big signal for more Palestinian unity. And the Americans and the Europeans and the Israelis have been working for years on creating schism in the Palestinian community and creating civil wars and unrest among the Palestinians themselves. So the most important lesson and the most important message is to call for more unity within the Palestinian community.
Well, we did see them actually turning their guns on children last week when they killed a 9-year-old boy in the West Bank simply for existing.
Yes.
He was doing absolutely nothing and he was shot. Not that others were doing anything else than being existing, but I think that this gave a push to the wave of Palestinian solidarity across the world, despite its horrendous effect on the Palestinians themselves, don't you think?
I think so, and I think the Palestinians in the West Bank are trying to actually are so frustrated because they want to do something. They want to face the enemy. They want to stand with the Jenin that is being turned into a military base with all these Israeli troops entering Jenin, arresting people, humiliating the population of the West Bank, continuing with this horrible siege of the West Bank, using the wall, using these all kinds of technologies in order to separate the Palestinians from each other, because the Israelis realized that any unity between the Palestinians will create more force and could have a louder and a more consistent impact on the Israeli massacres that are being ongoing for now 56 days.
Well, the current global intifada of conscience, if I may, as I'm calling it, in support of Palestine, does have a lot of indications, on top of which is that the Zionist Israeli narrative no longer is allowed by these masses to prevail against said masses' will and against the truth that we are all watching on our smartphones and on TV sets. How does that truly serve the Palestinian cause when you see young people as young as 16 and 17 in the streets of Washington or New York or London or Copenhagen or across the world just taking to the streets and refusing this Zionist narrative? How does it serve the Palestinian cause?
First, I just want to say that I read this report by Mondovez this morning saying that half of the people in the United States under 35 years of age actually think that the operation that Hamas conducted on October 7th is justified. And Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, has said that this the attack of October 7th doesn't come from void. It is a reaction to all this oppression for so many years. And this is very important for the masses in Europe and in the United States to realize that, Palestinians are not criminals, they're not terrorists, they're just people who are suffering from so much oppression, and all of a sudden they one day dared to say no for this oppression, and they dared to stand up for their rights and resist. And this is their fundamental right, and everyone, everywhere in the world can understand this. The Israeli narrative, is undefendable. The Israelis, no matter how hard and no matter how many resources they will put into it, they cannot defend their positions. In fact, their politicians, their prime minister, their head minister of defense have said things that are obscene. They called Palestinians non-human. They actually called for killing everybody in Gaza, raising it down to the floor. I mean, what do they think? What did they think when they said this? They think the whole world will actually go in with this racist kind of an approach of actually doing a genocide against another people. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. And the images are so flagrant, everywhere around the world. So what would one expect? Of course, the Israeli and American narrative would collapse. And of course, there will be this popular support around the world, because apparently there are still good people around the world, people who have a conscience, people who realize that human dignity is for everybody, and it's not just a bunch of people, a group of people considering themselves the chosen people who have the right to actually kill other people indiscriminately and have the right to life more than others. This is absolutely undefendable around the world, and I think the popular support for the Palestinian people and for the rights of the Palestinian people will increase in the coming weeks, and I hope it will have a bigger impact on the world, whereas we need a permanent, immediate ceasefire. That's what the world is calling for. It's not such a big political request. It's a basic humanitarian call, and no one can actually, I think, object this, because it's for all humans everywhere.
Well, unless you are a Zionist, then you would call for more than that. But I absolutely hear what you're saying. Dr. Omar Nashabi, political analyst and loyal expert in human rights, supervisor of the Al-Qaws supplement, which is published weekly with the Lebanese newspaper Al-Akhbar. I do advise you, ladies and gents, to read it if possible. Thanks a million for being with us. Time always flies by when you are with us, Dr. Nashabi, because of how important your analysis and the facts that you bring to the table when we speak about Palestine. So thank you for this. And ladies and gents, thank you for watching the Mid East stream for this week, as we bring you the latest of what's happening, especially